Friends, we are back. We have another week of videos. I'm wearing a very bright shirt because we had very bright books this week and I love matching the covers. It's very fun for me to match my outfit to the thumbnail videos. Each of my weekly updates, I put the book covers in the background. I'll often think about what in my wardrobe will work well with those covers. So I thought a very vibrant green would go with the yellows and pinks of this video and these books that we've read. Let's dive on into the first book. This is Cover Story by Mari McFarlane. This is a book I've been excited to read, kind of. I read Just Last Night by her in, I want to say April maybe, and I had a fine experience. It was a 4-star for me. I thought the writing was quite good, but I wasn't attached to the characters. I just kind of felt fairly ambivalent towards the book itself. This is now my second book by the author, and so I wanted to see if I liked it more this go around. Maybe this plotline would suit my reading taste better. This is a book that is set in the UK. This is basically a fake dating story. So we have a journalist and then her adult intern who comes in after a bit of a career shift. He decides he wants to get into journalism. And so she goes undercover. She is meeting with someone in her undercover disguise. He happens to stumble upon them in the midst of her being undercover, and she has to play off how they know each other. And she says, "This is my boyfriend." And then he gets roped into being her pretend boyfriend for this cover story that they have going on. It's a bit of an enemies to lovers story. They don't really like each other off the bat. There's some like weird animosity that I don't even really know where it stemmed from. It felt very random and like purposeless. Like I couldn't really understand why she had so many opinions about him and he had opinions about her. I understood his point of view more than hers, but it felt a little bit random and just for the sake of a trope rather than being like useful to the plot, if that makes sense. One thing I found very interesting about this book, and this is a very silly comment, but because it's set in the UK, they do a French exit. And I have only ever heard of an Irish goodbye, which is where you like leave a party and you don't really like announce that you're going, you just kind of disappear and make your exit. But because it's set in the UK, they call it a French exit. And I thought that was so funny because I've never heard that term before. And I was like, I know exactly what this means, but like that's not the word we use. And it just got me thinking about how often we have words based in a like continent or culture, and then that culture has a different word for it than theirs. So it did make me want to like do some research into why we call it an Irish goodbye as opposed to a French exit or whatever. That was just very entertaining for me as a North American reader. I've not run into that before, so that brought me a lot of joy. And I know it's very silly, but bear with me. Overall, I rated this book 4 stars. I liked it. I think I've discovered that romance is not my favorite genre. Maybe I've just read too much of it recently, but it feels tired. I know what's gonna happen. I know there's gonna be a third act conflict. I know that we're gonna have some sort of like dramatic flirting. I love a good bit of banter, don't get me wrong, but I'm just, I don't really care. So I think I need to put myself on a romance ban, which is funny because typically I like read more romances than other genres, but I think I just have like gone too far with it and I think I need to take a bit of a break. We'll see if I do that or not. I felt the same way with romantasy specifically, so I've not read any of those in a while, and I'm actually in the middle of a number of romantasy series that I'm not really intending to finish because I just don't care. Like if love is the main plot point, I'm not that interested. Like I need some sort of other storyline going through the story that we're focusing on, and then love happens to also exist during that story. But if like the main story is a love story, I'm kind of like, give me more. I don't know. Which is not typically how I walk into romances. So I think I need to put myself on a bit of a ban because maybe I would have liked this a lot more if I was more in the mood for a romance or more interested in a love story. Either way, this book did ask some questions, so let's get into those. First, is it ever okay to perform or curate yourself in order to get access to the truth? Continuing on the journalism thread, how do morals and ambition coexist within journalism, and who gets to decide where the balance of that lies? And then lastly, where does accountability lie when the person accused is someone who's a beloved member of a community? We put this in 2 spots for the board. So the very first one, we put this on the Spell Your Name challenge. This goes in C for cover story. And then the second spot we put this in is the monthly new release. So this was an October release. I'm so glad to have this monthly spot ticked off. This is the most stressful spot, and I know I say that every time I add a new book to it. It is nice to be a third of the way through this now because it never gets easier. I'm always trying to figure out what the next book is and how I'm gonna read it. And this is what the board looks like now with those updates added in. Next, we read Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. This is a deep dive into the history of tuberculosis, what it is, why it is, and why do we still have it despite having a cure. So he dives into the story of a man named Henry. So there are some narrative aspects to it. There's a lot of history to it. John Green is a very entertaining writer. So even though this is technically a history or informative piece of writing, it's a very engaging piece of writing. There are a few things I really took away from this book. There's a point in the book where he talks about the fact that tuberculosis could advance and have another branch come off of it that could then end up completely wiping out everyone who has had access to the cure and resources and whatnot to handle that. Yet anyone who has like wealth or lives in somewhere like North America, like most of Western Europe, places with a lot of technology, a lot of science, a lot of resources and money, very first world locations, we don't need to be afraid of that, because the second something comes out, we have the money and the people who are going to fight against it because it's attacking the rich, so to speak. I thought that was such a profound commentary on, and honestly the whole book is a commentary on how tuberculosis shouldn't be killing anyone. We have a cure, we know how this works, we are able to fix it, but because there are communities that don't have access to those resources or finances to afford those resources, people are still dying from TB regularly. And it's really like a poor man's disease, which is so tragic. And I knew very little about tuberculosis before this, but realizing how privileged I am, and I really enjoy books like this that highlight my privilege, because I take not having tuberculosis for granted. I never think about it. I never think about the fact that if I got it, I couldn't fix it. I have access to medical care, and I have access to so many things that can make me well. And this book really did a beautiful job about showing how my privilege, both at being a white individual and living in a first world country, is something that I take for granted and something that so many people are unable to heal because they don't have those privileges. And so it really made me think about how I want to use my privilege. I don't have any specific answers for how you should fix that, but I do think knowledge is the first step, and then after knowledge comes donating, different things like that to support a cause that's very important, especially one that's curable. There are a lot of questions that John Green is asking, and I think the primary one is, what does the current presence of tuberculosis in the world tell us about the state of the world? I think that's ultimately what he's trying to ask the reader. I think the questions that lie under that are, if tuberculosis is curable and preventable and mostly treatable with tools that we've had for decades, why is it still an issue? What is our responsibility, both on an individual level and a collective level, when a disease is curable and yet there are people still dying from it due to poverty and neglect and inequality? And then lastly, how does stigma contribute to perpetuating the disease beyond biology? I've said this before in previous videos, but I'll just put out a reminder for you. I don't rate nonfiction. This started because I don't rate memoirs, because it's a person's story. I don't know how to rate someone's story. But in general, for nonfiction, I just don't like rating reality. I think that's a weird thing to do. I would say this is a book worth reading. I think the concepts and the information is really valuable. So I would encourage people to read this, because I think it's information that is easy to gain, has a real solution, and yet doesn't have the support socially to fix it. And I was thinking about how COVID hit and we fixed COVID very quickly. People died, there was significant loss and grief in the midst of that, but we're 5 years out of COVID and people aren't really dying from COVID anymore. And imagine if we put all that same resource and energy into tuberculosis, we could see it fixed. And I feel like the reason we don't have it fixed is because the people with money and power and privilege don't see the needs, they don't attend to it. I think reading this book was really helpful for me to recognize my own privilege, recognize the ways in which I don't worry about this because it's not in my face, because I've had the money and my community and society around me has the money to not have to stress about this, even though it is a significant disease and killer of people. This goes in 2 spots on the board. The very first one is the alphabet challenge. I put this for E for everything, and everything is tuberculosis. Second spot I put this in is the blurbed book. So we officially have completed another category on the board. We have now read 3 books by authors who blurbed tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. I'm actually sad to finish this category because these were all highly rated books for me. Everything was a 4.5 star or more. I think I picked a really good book for this category, and I'd be intrigued to try this again later on if I do HRCYED again. This is what the board looks like now with my 2 slots filled and an entire bingo square completed. Lastly, we read Recursion. This is a book by Blake Crouch. And I read this in pretty much one sitting. I read this entire thing yesterday after work. It is a really trippy, weird, time warping, memory, sci-fi thriller book. It's really hard to describe this book because the time travel element makes it very unrealistic, but it's still asking really important questions. This book centers on 2 characters. We have Helena and we have Barry. Helena is in 2007, Barry is in 2018, 16? Something like that, when we first meet him. So you're following these characters at different timelines. Helena is a scientist. She is trying to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease so that she can help her mother keep her memories. And Barry is a police officer in the NYPD. He has to help a woman who is on a suicide attempt, basically, to jump off of a building. He rushes up and has this full conversation with her while she is telling him about this disease that she has, which is false memory syndrome. FMS is something that this book really focuses on. She woke up one day and had memories of 2 completely different lives that she had lived. One in which she is a single woman working in New York City, and the other where she lives in Vermont. She has a husband and a son. And she does not know how she's living with this false memory of having a husband and a son because her life is in New York City. She has her apartment, but it feels so real to her. And she does not know how to process both of those things feeling real at the same time, and she's very mentally confused and conflicted about it. Barry is the officer who takes the call, ends up on this roof with her as she is trying to explain to him what is happening. The story is basically Barry trying to understand, why is this happening? Why are there multiple memories? What is going on here? Like, this is crazy. And then also we're following Helena as she is trying to solve this issue for her mom. This book was not really for me. I don't think science fiction books are my cup of tea typically, which I know I just rated Project Hail Mary 5 stars last week. I understand that that sounds hypocritical, but in general, time warpy books are just not my favorite. I've read a few of them, and every time I walk out of it being like, meh. I think books that incite panic and books in which the characters are going through tremendous panic or loss based on a psychological issue, I don't really enjoy reading. I don't mind panic in the form of war. I think historical fiction and like war-based fiction is very engaging to me, but anything that's like psychological or mental and like time warpy and like distorted reality, I just don't really enjoy reading about. I did enjoy the questions that Blake Crouch was trying to ask, and I thought that concept was very interesting, and so I enjoyed thinking through how I would process these different scenarios and whatnot. But beyond that, I don't think this was the narrative for me with those questions. As a result, I rated this book 3.75 stars. I think that's probably an unpopular opinion. I imagine that people like this book more than I did. I rated it 3.75 because I did like the questions and I did like the concepts and the writing was good, but I didn't enjoy myself. Like, I didn't have a good time. I don't want to read it again. Okay, I know I've talked about the questions a lot, so let me actually get into what the questions are. First, you're dealing with the concept of if you could change something painful in your past, but it's going to impact other people in a negative way, would you do it? When does the pursuit of solving suffering, such as death, disease, grief, loss, when does that cross into dangerous territory where the cost is more than just technical, it's also deeply moral? And then lastly, what are the unintended consequences of trying to fix the past? And does changing the past always ripple out into making things worse? Or Can it make things better? I read this book because I saw Ashlyn read this, and so obviously I put this on my booktuber recommendation for Ashlyn. I'll link Ashlyn's channel in the cards above. And then I also put this in the alphabet challenge. I put this for R for Recursion. And this is what the board looks like with Recursion added to it. Let's get into the weekly favorites. I had a hard time picking a favorite this week for the polar opposite reason as last week. Last week I had all 5 stars. Had a really hard time narrowing down what I wanted to do, which is obviously why all of them are on my weekly ranking. This week, I had a hard time because I didn't love any of the books. I liked them, and initially I wasn't sure if I wanted to add a nonfiction to the weekly favorites, but I did. So Everything Is Tuberculosis was my favorite read of this week. I don't really know how I want to rank it yet, so Editing Sarah has decided, so you will just see it on the board where I put it. I really enjoyed the way that book made me think. I enjoyed the writing style. I enjoyed the narrative with Henry. I think it's an important read, and so I wanted to include it on this board. Thank you for coming with me this week as we read some very bright and colorful books. I'm excited to have another nonfiction on the chart. I feel like most of what I've been reading is fiction, and I really want to read more nonfiction because I love it. I love reading nonfiction, and I don't do it as much as I want to. We now have read 36 books with HRCYED. We have filled many spots on the board, which is amazing. We have 6 squares completed after this video, and we have much more to do. For now, keep resting, keep reading, and I will see you soon.